Now, according to PwC's 2025 Global CEO Survey, business leaders are more optimistic about the world economy, with almost 60% of CEOs expecting global growth to increase over the next 12 months. This is up from 38% last year and 18% 2 years ago. And joining me now to discuss the factors fueling the positive sentiment is Dion Shango, CEO for PwC Africa. Thank you so much for your time, Dion. I do understand that you are not at WEF, and that makes both of us, but hoping that the mood from the private sector at WEF does reflect the general mood of the CEOs in the survey. And actually, just talking about that mood, quite optimistic. Just talk to me about the key drivers of what is driving that optimism from the majority of the CEOs, considering also the clouds that still hang over the economic landscape globally.
Thank you, Znati, and good afternoon to your viewers. So when you go back 10 years, looking at our survey, there have been two particular years in which the attitude towards the global economic outlook has been more positive. That was in 2021 and 2022, the so-called COVID-19 years. And that particular optimism would have been buoyed or fueled by the expected turbocharged recovery as the world emerged out of lockdown and COVID-19. So whilst direct reasons haven't been provided for the optimism this year from the CEOs who responded, we are of the view that the optimism can be attributed to a variety of factors, including falling inflation that is expected over the next little while, and easing macroeconomic volatility or factors that are a bit more predictable, as well as an increased political certainty environment. You'll remember, Znati, that last year saw over 50% of the world's population holding general elections. And that would have introduced a significant amount of political uncertainty into the world, and that would have found its way into global economic outlooks. So these are the factors that we think would have driven this optimism, but also a factor like new and emerging technologies and the opportunity presented by something like AI or Gen AI could also be part of the story.
Yeah, it's quite interesting also that you talk about really us emerging from a period of uncertainty. Of course, looking at the political landscape last year, we also know the kind of stabilizing effect the post-election narrative had on South Africa and also the growth prospects. So it's also going to be quite interesting because now we are in the early days of Donald Trump taking up the presidency in the United States. But I mean, you talk about these new technologies, and we've even seen in the equity markets, companies like NVIDIA and all these AI companies really driving up investor sentiment there. A lot of investment has been pumped. A lot of AI investment has been pumped by companies here. And I know, of course, that is a big pillar there at WEF as well. Are companies actually seeing the returns of that investment, though?
Probably yes and no, Znati. And I'll tell you why I say that. So when we asked last year, the previous year's survey, we asked CEOs, whether they expect to see profitability or revenue improvements because of AI. That number came to about early 40s, 42, 43%. Yeah. When compared to whether those CEOs actually did see improvements in profitability and revenue, it's actually 34% of CEOs that responded in the positive.
Okay.
What CEOs did note, however, over the last 12 months is that there were significant productivity gains by employees.
Okay.
And in particular, how employees were able to be more efficient with their time because of AI. So certainly we are making strides, but it's important to remember that we are still very much in the early days of the AI or Gen AI journey, and we have to be patient. The interesting thing about me, though, is that even though this actual performance is somewhat below expectations or those expressed last year, the number of CEOs that are more optimistic about improved profitability and revenue generation has gone up from that circa 42% to closer to 46% now of CEOs that are more optimistic that they'll see further revenue and profitability improvements. So we just have to watch the story very carefully as it unfolds.
All right. Yeah, really quite interesting because, I mean, also when you talk about returns, you expect to talk about monetary returns, but also really ignoring the returns that are not so monetary as you talk about efficiency gains there as well. What's also interesting is that I saw 4 out of 10 CEOs said that they've had to reinvent their companies and compete in new sectors. I'm wondering if it's AI that's really opening up these industry borders, or is it just that companies are being forced, to kind of be more flexible because of the current economic landscape?
Indeed. So we are CEOs, what some of these factors are that are driving the sentiment of them seeing themselves at risk of not being viable, say in the next 10 years or so, if they continue along their current path. And surprisingly, things like regulatory complexity come into it.
Yeah.
Certainly, the impact of new and emerging technologies like Gen AI is also a particular factor. But I think it's been heartwarming to see that CEOs are not sitting still, doing nothing. In the last 5 years, most CEOs have taken at least one significant action in trying to mitigate the risk that they see. And so business model reinvention is something that is high on their agenda. CEOs have told us that the significant actions that they've taken include, operating in a completely new sector that they've never been exposed to before. Really ramping up efforts of being more creative in coming up with new products or services. Companies have also, made sure that they collaborate a lot more with other organizations in order to extract value in a different way. So the way in which companies create, deliver, and capture value for their stakeholders has fundamentally have to be rethought, and really the business turned on its head to see how more effectively can that value be generated.
And of course, another big theme there is climate change. Have companies now settled in climate change investment, bringing more upside than downside?
We have seen an uptick in climate change. What CEOs are telling us about the journey that they're on is that, yes, climate change has resulted in some profitability improvements. About a third of our CEOs have told us that globally.
Okay.
What they have highlighted, though, is that to initiate such climate-related investments is actually a lot more onerous than what you think. Again, regulatory complexity is cited as a particular reason that makes it difficult to make these investments. But on the positive side, CEOs have said that these climate-related investments, about more than 50% have said that these investments have either reduced costs or have had no negative impact on costs at all. So I think this is an area that will continue to improve and grow, and we can definitely expect to see more climate-related investments as companies become more sustainable into the future.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. We do have to wrap up the conversation there, Dion, but also looking forward to seeing those Africa-specific reports as well. That was Dion Shango from PwC Africa.